imperialism. Okay? And imperialism was a period where the Europeans went out into the world in order to build colonies all over the world. And they did this because they needed several things. They were looking for a couple of things. Number one, they were looking for raw materials to feed their factories. Businesses businesses in industrialized countries need raw materials in order to manufacture and mass produce goods to sell to consumers. Businesses also need industrial raw materials. Uh, Not only do businesses need raw materials, but businesses need markets, new populations to sell their goods in order to make a profit. And then governments need raw materials in order to build up their army, their navy, the military, as industrialized countries competed with one another for world supremacy. And ultimately, the industrialized countries of Europe built colonies all over the world, starting in the 1700s. Europeans have gone out into the world before. Okay, Europeans have gone out into the world during the Renaissance. Europeans have gone out into the world even before the Renaissance. All right, but the first wave of exploration that happened before the Renaissance, that began before the Renaissance, Europeans had different motivations for going out into the world than the age of imperialism. Okay, so if you look at this chart here, if you look at this chart, right, you see that Europeans went out into the world, right, before the Renaissance, which is the 1500s, before the 1500s. And then after the Reformation, the Renaissance, the Scientific Revolution, the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution happened, right? And the Industrial Revolution industry need a lot of raw materials. Raw materials are the natural sources that are used in order to manufacture goods, like oil, for example, like ore to make iron, for example, like cotton to make clothes, for example, right? Raw materials are the things that industry need in order to manufacture goods, right? You need iron in order to make guns and machine guns and ships and trains, for example, right? So the first wave of European exploration had different motivations than imperialism, than the period of imperialism. In the first wave of European exploration, which happened between 1487 to 1522, Europeans went out into the world looking for safer refuge. You know, many Europeans were running away from religious wars and religious conflicts, right? Europeans also went out into the world looking for shortcuts to popular markets, like Marco Polo, looking for a shortcut to India, like Christopher Columbus, looking for shortcuts to India, right? And Spain and Portugal went out into the world in order to spread Christianity, right? And so, as this map shows, the exploration of Europeans up to the 1700s, and you see colored lines, right? You see the 10 line, Spain went out and discovered Latin America, right? South America, and so did Portugal. Spain ended up establishing a lot of colonies in Latin America, South America. Portugal did as well, right? And then you have the Christopher Columbus trip of 1492, right? Christopher Columbus was given a mission by Queen Isabella and Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain in order to find a shortcut to India, but instead landed on the American hemisphere. Spanish explorers landed in the Philippine Islands over here, for example. And then you have the Vikings who ventured out to the west, landed in America, landed in Iceland and then in America. The Norsemen, or the Vikings, if you will, they were some of the first to land in the American hemisphere. You got Britain going all the way down to the southern tip of Africa, going to India, in order to trade with Asia. And so the first wave of European exploration, the Europeans were looking for profit, right? They were looking for refuge. You got people from England, for example, who escape the persecution by Queen Elizabeth, the Puritans. They fled, and they found refuge in the 13 colonies, for example. You have the Calvinists who fled, and they found refuge in America. So the first wave of European exploration was due to the quest for better trade routes, the quest for gold and silver, like in the case of Spain and Portugal, looking for gold and silver in Latin America. You got the quest for better refuge, safer refuge, escaping religious wars or political wars. So the first wave of European exploration were due to those reasons. And it happened between 1487 and 1522, right? And 1487 to 1522, that's around the period of the Renaissance and the Reformation, right? Where European rediscovered, gained a renewed sense of interest in the world. And all of this, the Enlightenment, the Scientific Revolution, they would all lead to the Industrial Revolution, as we learned last week. The large-scale production, the use of factories to mass produce goods, the invention of new technology in order to make businesses more efficient, and then the free market system in England that enabled entrepreneurs and private individuals to start businesses. And as industrialization spread throughout Europe and over to the United States, there arose a competition for wealth. Right? Wealth that is based on industry. And this competition meant the race for empire. And so this race for empire is a period that we call imperialism. And this period happened between 1870 to 1914. And this race for empire, Europeans ventured out into the world, this time to build colonies, to expand their power abroad, outside of their boundaries, outside of their country, to build colonies for the purpose of exploiting the raw materials, the labor, the land, in order to enrich the country, to compete with other industrialized countries. And so this new wave of European exploration in imperialism, it happened as a result of the Industrial Revolution, and it happened between 1870 and 1914. And here I will talk about the causes of imperialism, the types of imperial rule, and imperialism all around the world. Okay, first I want to explain the differences between colonialism and imperialism. All right? Colonialism is the act of building a colony. All right? A colony is a country that was taken over, right, by another country. A colony is a country, right, that was taken over because of its natural resources, its people, right? The industrialized country who took over and built this new colony wanted to use the population to buy their manufactured goods, right? And so colonialism, the colonialism is a act of building of building a colony, or of acquiring or occupying another country for the exploitation of land, labor, markets, and natural resources. Okay? Now labor that is the work that is produced by people. Markets, right? That is what the Europeans can sell to those people. And in the natural resources, those are the iron, gold, silver, cotton, rubber, for example, right? So colonialism is the act of building colonies, of acquiring territories, of occupying territories. And then imperialism is a policy of expansion. Imperialism is a policy of expanding beyond the border of a country in order to build empire, expanding political power, expanding economic power by building colony. That is imperialism. Okay? And I want to talk about first the causes of imperialism. And there are many causes of imperialism. Imperialism was caused by industrialization, militarization, nationalism, and humanitarian. So, first and foremost, imperialism was spurred by the Industrial Revolution. The science, the technology, the industry, the transportation, and the communication strengthened the West, right? So industrialization gave the West a huge advantage by which to conquer and occupy other countries and other people. And so with this technology, industrialized European countries expanded to build overseas empires, like in Africa, in Asia. And what they were looking for was raw materials. And what are the raw materials? Well, as I said, the raw materials are things that you need to produce goods. So just think of the things, for example, right? In order to build a chair, what do you need to build a chair? Well, you need wood to build a chair, right? You need glue, and glue comes from rubber, right? To build a chair. So the manufactured goods are the things that are needed the raw materials are the things that are needed in order to manufacture goods, right? And the goods are manufactured in huge factories. They are produced in large numbers, in mass quantities, in order to sell to the world for profit, right? Another example of raw materials is cotton. You need cotton in order to make clothing, right? So cotton is the raw materials, and the shirt for example, is to manufacture goods. Okay, so the need for the raw materials uh, uh, led to competition among industrialized countries. So industrialization produced intense competition for these raw materials. Because what the Europeans wanted, European industrialized nations wanted, was they wanted to be stronger than their rival, right? England wants to be stronger than France. France wants to be stronger than Germany. To be stronger, you need better industry. Better industry means more raw materials, right? Uh, Stronger country means more money, right? More money means you need to sell all around the world, which means you need new markets. So, industrial revolution created intense competition for empire, right? And this competition led to a military buildup, right? So if France wants to be stronger than Britain, France needs to have a stronger military than Great Britain, right? If France wants to be stronger than Germany, then France need to have a stronger military than Germany, and then Germany will outdo France by building an even better military. So industrialization led to a military buildup, right? And this military buildup, right, required raw materials because science and technology produced new and more deadlier and larger forms of killing, right? Better weapons, greater killing capacities. And so large armies, sophisticated weapons required a lot of raw materials to produce, right? And then so as a result, industrialized nations compete for colonies, compete for raw materials all throughout the world in order to build up their military, right? And I will give you two examples of militarization, right? One, the German unification. Two, France's industrialization and the Second Empire. And then I will talk about the alliances that came out of militarization. German unification is a great example of the militarization that resulted from industrialization. German unification was a period that came after German industrialization. Okay? German unification means unifying all of the German speaking people into one country or one empire. Before German unification, Germany was not Germany. And in fact, there was no Germany, right? Germany was a language spoken by many people who lived in many different cities. But between 1806 and 1812, Napoleon dominated Europe and took large parts of land between France and Germany that were inhabited by German speaking people. Now, Napoleon ultimately built a French empire. Okay, now you know from the previous sessions that Napoleon came after the first French Republic failed, right? The first French Republic was created after King Louis XVI was beheaded, right? And King Louis XVI was beheaded during a revolution that was motivated by the Enlightenment, right? And then so after King Louis XVI was beheaded, France, the revolutionaries created the First Republic. And that First Republic failed. It imploded. And so Napoleon took over and he made himself into an emperor of a French empire, right? And we'll call that the First French Empire. And during that time, Napoleon took over a very, very wealthy, well, not wealthy, but resource rich territory between France and Germany known as the Rhineland. Germany also dissolved the Holy Roman Empire, right? That people, that German people were a part of. And in the Rhineland, Napoleon organized the Rhine Confederation. And the Rhine Confederation was basically a puppet, a French puppet, right? It was Napoleon put German-speaking towns and cities into this confederation, and they all live under his rule. And at first, Napoleon was welcomed by the Germans. Napoleon was welcomed by the Germans because Napoleon brought with him enlightened policies, right? And you know from the previous sessions that enlightened policies are policies that focuses on freedom and liberty. And so, for example, Napoleon ended feudalism. He freed the peasants. Peasants are also called serfs. He freed the serfs. Napoleon also promoted trade, right? Free trade among the German towns. Napoleon also ended hatred of Jews, otherwise known as anti-Semitism. And Napoleon united the scattered Germans in small and medium states. But ultimately, Napoleon's rule would turn abusive, right? Because Napoleon had never intended to use enlightened ideals of liberty and freedom in order to promote citizenship rights. No, Napoleon wanted to use these ideals in order to strengthen his rule. And ultimately, his rule became abusive, and the German people resented his rule. Well, Napoleon was defeated finally in 1812, right? And after Napoleon was defeated, Europe got together and they met at the capital of Austria. And this was known as the Congress of Vienna. And at that meeting, the goal was how to bring Europe back to the old ways, how to bring back rulers that Napoleon had overthrown, and how to restore Europe to the way that it used to be, right? But the German-speaking people did not want things to go back the way that they used to be. Under Napoleon, the German people, the German-speaking people now want freedom to rule over themselves. They want unification. And so German nationalism grew. The movement to unify the German-speaking people grew from Napoleon's rule. And at the Congress of Vienna, these nationalists, or Germans who wanted unification, fought for unification and failed. Because Austria, who wanted to rule over the German towns, Austria, the Austrian Empire, was another empire that spoke German. Because Austria wanted to rule over the German towns and cities, denied German unification, right? And so as a result, the German nationalists failed to unify. And this attempt to unify German-speaking people did not end, because the nationalists continued to make attempts to unify. Ultimately, they did succeed, but there had been a couple of failed attempts. One in 1830s, there was a failed attempt when German nationalists formed an economic union known as the Zollverein. And this economic union of German city-states was formed for the purpose of promoting free trade, right? Free trade means trading without tariffs, trading without taxes. Tariffs are taxes. And the Zollverein resulted in economic prosperity in the 1830s, but it failed to unify the German city states into one country. Another attempt was made in 1848, right, when nationalists offered the Prussian king. Prussia is a city state, a powerful city state in Germany, where the nationalists offered King Frederick William the Fourth of Prussia the crown, right? They said, look, rule over us so that we can be one country, right? They say, here, take this crown, be our king so that we can be one country. But Frederick the Great said no. He denied. So the 1848, what became known as the Frankfurt Assembly, because that was the meeting that took place that offered the crown to Frederick the Fourth, and it failed because Frederick the Fourth said no. The third time was a success. The Prussian Prime Minister Otto von Bismarck. Okay? Otto von Bismarck, a Prussian. Now, Prussia is a large German city-state, all right? There were many German city-states, but Prussia was one of the most powerful ones. And Otto von Bismarck was a prime minister of King Frederick William the Fourth of Prussia, right? And King Frederick William the Fourth of Prussia comes from a family called the Hohenzollern family. That family ruled Prussia. And Otto von Bismarck wanted to promote the power of the Hohenzollerns. He wanted to expand the power of the Hohenzollerns. And in order to expand the power of Prussia and the Hohenzollerns, Otto von Bismarck believed that unification can expand the power of Prussia, right? So Hohenzollern was not a nationalist as much as he was loyal to King Frederick William the Fourth of Prussia. And so Otto von Bismarck, he wants to unite German-speaking people in order to expand the power of Prussia, right? And to do that, in 1862, he asked the Prussian lawmakers to build up a military. And so 1862 began Prussia's path to building up an industrialized army. In his speech, which would become known as the Blood and Iron Speech, Otto von Bismarck said, Germany does not look to Prussia's liberalism, but to her power. The great questions of the day are not to be decided by speeches and majority resolutions. That was the mistake of 1848 and 1849. But blood and iron. And so what Otto von Bismarck says, that unification needs to come from some fighting, which is blood. And it needs to come from an industrialized army, which is iron, right? So Otto von Bismarck was asking for a deadly army that is made up of an industrialized military, okay? Well, Otto von Bismarck ultimately got his army, and Prussia became very, very powerful. Prime Minister Otto von Bismarck, with the strong Prussian army, pursued a very, very aggressive foreign policy in order to expand Prussian power. Bismarck ultimately used his army to fight 3 wars to unite Germany, right? The first war was with Denmark in 1864. And in this war, the Prussians allied with the other German-speaking empire, the Austria-Hungarian Empire, So in 1864, an alliance of Prussian Austria defeated Denmark in order to take territories that were inhabited by German speaking people. And so as a result, in 1864, Prussia and Austria freed German speaking cities and towns from the control of Denmark, right? But Otto von Bismarck wanted to take those German cities and towns for Prussia. And so as a result, in 1866, Otto von Bismarck led Prussia into a war with their former ally, Austria. And so 1866, in the war with Austria, ended in Prussian victory, and the Prussians annexed more territories. The territories won from Denmark and the territories that belonged to Austria. So Prussia expanded or united with these German-speaking cities and towns. In 1866, Otto von Bismarck dissolved the German Confederation. The German Confederation was created by Austria in 1812 at the Congress of Vienna, right? It was meant, the Congress of the German Confederation was meant as Austrian rule over German-speaking people, right? But Otto von Bismarck, after defeating Austria in 1866, dissolved the German Confederation and created a new confederation under Prussia. Otto von Bismarck now he united, right, German-speaking cities and towns that used to be under Denmark, that used to be under Austria, now putting them under Prussia, right? But there is a huge territory inhabited by German-speaking people in the area known as Alsace and Lorraine, which is between France and Germany. Now, to take that territory, Prussia would have to take it from France. And Prussia did not want to be the aggressor and declare war on France for no apparent reason, right? And so Otto von Bismarck was very confident of the Prussian military. He was supremely confident that the Prussian army was superior to the French army. And so in 1870, Otto von Bismarck caused a war with France by rewriting a telegram. Otto von Bismarck took a telegram that was sent by his staff, and he reworded the telegram in order to say that the Prussian king insulted the French ambassador. Right? Insulting the French ambassador means insulting the French ruler. And the French ruler at this time was the nephew of Napoleon III. Right? And Napoleon III, when he read the account in the newspapers that the Prussian king had insulted a French ambassador, Napoleon III then declared war on Prussia. And so in 1870, France declared war on Prussia due to a fake telegram that was written by Otto von Bismarck himself. Of course, he wrote it under the name of his staff, right? He didn't sign the telegram Otto von Bismarck, right? He rewrote the telegram, right, under the name of his staff, right? And so this war between France and Prussia was caused by some fake telegram that was falsified by Otto von Bismarck. And this is exactly what Otto von Bismarck wanted to do. He wanted to go to war with France. He didn't have a real reason to go to war with France. He had a hidden reason to go to war with France, and that is to take territories that was inhabited by German-speaking people, right? That was his hidden reason. But he didn't have a legitimate reason. And so he had to fake this telegram, to falsify an insult to get France to declare war, right? And so after France, Napoleon III declared war on Prussia, the war ended quick. The war ended in less than a year because the Prussian superior military destroyed the poorly organized and poorly supplied French soldiers. The Prussians lay siege to Paris for 4 months. Laying siege to a city means surrounding the city to prevent food from coming in. So 4 months without any food and supplies coming into the city of Paris. The people in Paris, the citizens of Paris, starved, right? They starved out. And so after 4 months of siege, Napoleon III surrendered to the Prussians in 1870, around November, December 1870. And Otto von Bismarck, now defeating France and uniting more territories that was inhabited by German-speaking people, Prussia took under its wing pretty much all cities inhabited by German-speaking people outside of Austria, right? And Otto von Bismarck achieved what the German nationalists had always wanted, which was a unified Germany under a German king, right? And so on January 1st, 1871, King William I of Prussia was crowned ruler of a brand new German empire. And where was he crowned? He was crowned right in Paris. Right outside of Paris. At the heart of France. King William I was crowned Kaiser Wilhelm I. Kaiser is German for Caesar. And Caesar means emperor, right? All of the rulers after Julius Caesar's became known as Caesars, right? Because Julius Caesar was such a great ruler that every single ruler after him was called Caesar. And the Germans saw themselves as an extension of the Roman Empire, right? Think of Charlemagne. For example, when he became the first Holy Roman emperor, for example. And William I of Prussia was crowned Kaiser Wilhelm I on January 1st, 1871. This was the beginning of the Second Reich, right? And you know this, you've heard of the Third Reich. You've heard of the Third Reich under Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler always talks about the Third Reich, right? The Second Reich happened between 1871 to 1917, right? When Germany was defeated in World War I. The First Reich was when Charlemagne was crowned the first Holy Roman Emperor in 900 AD, and it ended in 1808 by Napoleon. And so the German unification, so as a result of this brand new German empire, right? This brand new German empire was created by a strong industrialized military. Now, as an empire, Otto von Bismarck became the chancellor of the German Empire, and he wanted to expand the German military even more. To do this, he needed raw materials that was outside of the capacity of Germany. And so Otto von Bismarck went into Africa and created 3 colonies in Africa in order to build up the German economy, the German military, and to create a brand new German navy. And all of this would require a lot of raw materials, a lot of money, right? Money that was made by selling manufactured goods to the colonies in Africa. And so as a result, the German Empire took 3 colonies in Africa. And so the German unification was an example of how militarization led to led to empire, led to colonialism, German colonialism in Africa. The second example was France's second empire. France's first empire was the one built by Napoleon, right? Napoleon the First. Napoleon the First built a powerful French empire, but it did not last very long. It only lasted for about 4 years. And Napoleon controlled all of Europe except for Britain. Britain resisted because Britain was industrialized, right? Well, his nephew, Napoleon III, came back to France and ruled in 1848. Because the Second French Republic had also failed, just as the First French Republic. So Napoleon III in 1848 came back to rule France. And Napoleon III, in order to compete with Britain and Germany, the brand new German Empire, Napoleon III began a rapid, aggressive industrialization of France, building railroads, constructing bridges, expanding Paris, right? And French businesses and entrepreneurs exploited this climate, this policy of industrialization. One French entrepreneur, Ferdinand de Lesseps, got together investment money, created a company, and built the Suez Canal, which would become very, very profitable, right? The Suez Canal was a great victory that connected the Mediterranean Sea with the Red Sea. And I'll talk about the Suez Canal later. Napoleon III also recognized labor unions, right, in order to promote workers. Also provided public education for both male and female. Napoleon III also tried to expand France's empire overseas. Napoleon sent an army into Mexico in order to turn Mexico into a colony, right? And so in 1860, Napoleon marched troops into Mexico City. Mexico was a brand new country that was established in 1821. And Napoleon III sent an army into Mexico City and put a family member named Maximilian to be emperor of Mexico. Basically, a puppet emperor of Mexico under Napoleon, right? And after 4 years of ruling Mexico in 1864, Maximilian was overthrown by Mexican nationalists, and the campaign into Mexico failed. Now, the defeat of the French is symbolized in the United States by the Battle of Puebla that happened on Cinco de Mayo, and that's why we have Cinco de Mayo, right? The campaign in Mexico, it failed. And Napoleon also made campaigns into Italy, and it also failed. uh, Napoleon's campaigns into Italy caused Italian unification. Italy united to become a country also, uh, and became a great rival to France as a result of Napoleon's campaigns into Italy. Napoleon also joined Britain and the Ottoman Empire in order to stop Russia from expanding south, and this led to a war known as the Crimean War. The Crimean War was a victory for France, Britain, and the Ottoman Empire, but France had nothing to show for. France had spent a lot of money on this war, right? And then in 1870, Napoleon III declared war on Prussia. And we know what happened to that war. France lost that war. And as a result of losing that war, France had to surrender the Alsace and Lorraine territory to Prussia, and France had to pay a huge sum of money called restitution to Prussia. And so the 1870 war with Prussia ended French domination of Europe, right? And it led to the crowning of Kaiser Wilhelm I in Versailles on January 1st, 1871. After the defeat and the surrender to Prussia, Napoleon III was overthrown, and a third French Republic was created. And this third French Republic went on to build colonies in North Africa and in Asia, in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. And this French Third Republic expanded their power overseas, took colonies in order to build military to protect themselves against Germany. France and Germany did not trust each other, and after 1871, they kept amassing, building up their military, right? Using their colonies to build up their militaries, expanding their industry in order to compete with one another in a rivalry for world domination that led to the creation of alliances. And in 1870, France and Germany created two alliances known as the Triple Alliance and the Triple Entente. Okay? Now, France did not trust Germany, and Germany did not trust France, right? In the future, if Germany is going to be attacked, then France would need help. Germany reached out, Otto von Bismarck reached out to Austria and Italy and created an alliance, which meant that if one country goes to war, then the other country would also come to their aid, right? So this means that if France would ever be attacked by Germany in the future, France would be attacked by Germany, Austria, and Italy. These countries, they all surround France. They surround France, right? And then so as a result, France, in order to counter this military alliance, reached out to Britain and Russia and formed an alliance with them known as the Triple Entente. And this alliance system will cause World War I in 1914. And I'll teach you about World War I next week. In addition to militarization, nationalism, right, caused colonialism, right? The need to build a superior country, right? Nationalism is the desire, the belief that one country is superior, right? Nationalism is a desire to build a better country, a better military, a better culture, a better society than any other country. And this nationalism would cause colonialism because you need a lot of money and power in order to be better than other countries. The other reason for colonialism is racism. I'll spend a moment talking about racism. Racism was invented in this period. The belief that human being can be divided into different races based on looks, based on features, right? And that one race is superior to another race. This idea was invented in this period by social Darwinism. Social Darwinism was a belief that was based on Charles Darwin's science. Charles Darwin was a scientist who discovered evolution. Now, if you've taken biology, then you have studied Charles Darwin's evolution. Charles Darwin said that natural selection, which is survival of the fittest, led to the creatures and animals that we have today. Right? That all of the animals that we have today, including humans, are here because these animals have better adapted to the environment than the other animals who were extinct, right? And so animals who could not adapt to nature will become extinct. Extinction means extinction means when a animal die out, right? And so social Darwinists like Herbert Spencer, there's a writer called Herbert Spencer in the 1800s, an English writer, who said that Charles Darwin's theory can explain inequality. Herbert Spencer wrote during the Industrial Revolution that produced great inequality among people, right? Herbert Spencer says that natural selection explains this inequality. That the inequality was a result of natural selection. That the rich were more able to adapt and became successful, and the poor people were not able to adapt and fell into poverty, which means that the rich people were superior to the poor people, right? And Herbert Spencer says that inequality was a result of natural selection. And so natural selection, that science of natural selection, was used in order to rationalize inequality. And inequality happened during the Industrial Revolution. Inequality was much greater in the colonies, right? In the colonies, like in Africa, like in Asia, for example, social Darwinism was used in order to justify the conquering and the killing of non-Europeans who were believed to be inferior and unfit to rule themselves. All right, so social Darwinism was used to rationalize European rule over non-European. And social Darwinism would become the basis of white supremacy. And racism, and so racism was a justification for colonialism, right? The other part of humanitarianism was, the other cause of imperialism was humanitarian. There were some people who wanted to make the world a better place, all right? One such person was Dr. David Livingstone, for example, who wanted to end colonialism and slavery in Africa by going into the colonies in order to spread Christianity, education, and build economic prosperity. in the colonies, right? So these are the causes of imperialism. And imperialism had three types of rule. Mainly there are four types of rule, right? Industrialized countries rule their colonies with four methods. One, the direct rule, like France. Indirect rule, that was used by Britain. Spheres of influence, mainly used in China and Latin America, and the protectorate. France used the direct rule. Direct rule is when France put their officials and their soldiers to directly rule over over another country, like Vietnam. Vietnam is an example of a direct rule. France in the 1880s took Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, and they ruled Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia with their own officials, their own soldiers, and they imposed the French culture on the Vietnamese people and the Laotians and the Cambodians, right? For example, they all had to speak French, they all had to go to school, and they all had to learn French culture, for example, right? Because the belief by the French was that the Vietnamese people, the Laotians, the Cambodians, they were not smart enough. They were not developed enough. They did not evolve enough in order to rule themselves, right? This was the belief of social Darwinism. And so in order to help them, then France would lend their rule, right? But France wanted to take the raw materials from Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia, which was rice, rubber, natural resources that was taken in order to make France wealthy. The British like to use an indirect rule, where the British would appoint a governor to oversee the local rulers, right? So the local rulers have limited power and they obey the governor, right? So the local rulers would carry out the laws that were essentially made by the governor, right? And the children of the local rulers were educated in England, right? So the difference was that in indirect rule, the countries were ruled by their own rulers. However, their own rulers took direction from England, right? In a direct rule, right? France, the foreign country, would directly rule over Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, or over in Africa, like Morocco, right? Industrialized countries also use what's known as a sphere of influence, where Britain, France, Germany, for example, in China, they claim parts of China as exclusive right to trade, which means that in that area, only they can trade and the other countries could not trade, right? And then so in a French sphere of influence, only the French can make money and build businesses in that area. The Germans, they cannot go in there, right? And the French cannot go into the German sphere of influence, or the Germans cannot go into the British sphere of influence. China, ultimately, by the late 1800s, was carved up into bits and pieces called spheres of influence that were claimed by the European powers, who made large loans to the Chinese monarch, and in exchange for these concessions or spheres of influence. Industrialized countries also use what is called a protectorate, like the United States use a protectorate, right? For example, in Cuba, the United States, after a war with Spain in 1848, turned Cuba into a protectorate. A protectorate is when a country rule themselves, right, under the advice of the United States. So a protectorate is similar to a direct rule, right? Uh, in a protectorate, the country get to rule themselves, right? They get to rule themselves. What's different about a protectorate is that the military is not there. In an indirect rule like Britain, right? In India, for example, was ruled by Britain, right? India was ruled by a governor, and it kept law and order with British military, right? In a protectorate like Cuba, the Cubans ruled themselves, right? And they kept peace with their own military. However, the government had to follow the orders of the Americans. So that is the protectorate. So these are the four types of rule over the colonies. Now I want to talk about imperialism all around the world. Ultimately, by 1914, the entire world fell under Western imperialism. And the Western imperialists are the United States, France, Great Britain, Italy. These are the main industrialized countries. Belgium, the Netherlands, right? The United States made Latin America its sphere of influence. So the United States claimed all of Latin America to be its sphere of influence. The Europeans ultimately took all of Africa, right? The Europeans and the Ottoman Empire took the Middle East. And here in India, Britain took India. France took Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia. Britain took Singapore. The Americans took the Philippines, right? The Americans tried to take Japan but failed. Japan ultimately became an imperial power themselves, taking colonies, taking over the French and the British colony, for example, during World War II. China fell to European imperialism. China was divided into bits and pieces called spheres of influence. And I want to give you two examples of imperialism. One in Africa. All right, if you look at Africa, in 1880, the colored parts are the colored parts. They represent African empires and African nations, right? And the Europeans, if you look at here, the Europeans, they took very small territories in 1880. And this was because in 1880, the Europeans had slow ships and they had poor medicine, which meant that the Europeans could not go deeper into Africa. So as a result, they took, the coastal area, like Britain took Sierra Leone, the Portuguese took Guinea, the Gambia, Britain, for example. And then over in East Africa, in Cameroon, the French took Cameroon. All right, this is in 1880. But then industrialization created powerful ships, created medicine that can cure disease like malaria. And so by 1914, the entire continent of Africa was colonized. 1880, only a few coastal regions were taken by the Europeans. By 1914, and this is barely 30 years later, the entire continent was colonized by England, France, Portugal, Germany, Belgium, Italy, Spain. The entire continent The only two countries that were not colonized was Ethiopia and Liberia over here. Ethiopia in the east and Liberia in the west. But every single country was colonized. And the Europeans were cruel to the Africans, regarding them as inferior human beings. And I want to give you two examples. This is Belgium, Congo. This is Belgium, Congo. Belgium, Congo is right here. This is Belgium, Congo. The Belgians, King Leopold II, were extremely cruel to the Congolese, regarding them as inferior human beings. They were slaves. Their purpose was to take raw materials for Belgium, like rubber, like diamond, for example, but mainly rubber. Rubber was very important for industrialization, especially as cars were mass produced, because rubber can be used in a lot of parts, right? And so these are children that were given quotas. Quotas is basically, okay, so in a day you have to give me 50 pounds of rubber. If you don't give me 50 pounds of rubber, I will cut off your hand. All right? And so that's how the Belgian ruled the people of the Congo, forcing them to take raw materials. If they don't get raw materials, then the punishment would be cutting off the hand. These pictures were taken by reporters who discovered these crimes and took these pictures to show to the rest of the world in order to expose the wrongdoing of Belgium. This is Leopold II, the ruler of Belgium. He is responsible for the policies that ultimately killed 10 million people in the Congo, enslaving them like this for the purpose of raw materials. And so the effect of colonialism is mass starvation, mass death, cruelty. And all of this was seen as okay. All of this was seen as just natural selection. Because these people were meant to die out anyways by natural selection. They would become extinct anyways. And so Europeans rationalize their abuse with social Darwinism. This picture here, these are the people who live in the German colonies. Okay, the German colonies are Cameroon, German East Africa, and German Southwest Africa. And here, these pictures that I'm showing you are people from German Southeast Africa. Today, they are a country of Namibia. The Germans were cruel to the Africans, right? Using them for natural resources and then exterminating them, right? So the Jewish genocide of World War II was not the first genocide. The first genocide happened in Namibia, where after the people were used, they were exterminated, and their head sometimes were used as trophies because they were like animals. They were inferior, right? And heads like this would be sent home for trophies. Here's another one. And as Africa was colonized, the people of Africa were turned into slaves, and they were sold. They were trafficked, right? For example, in West Africa, Africans who were kidnapped, sold into slavery, They were brought over by the British, by the Portuguese, by the Spanish to their colonies over over in the British colonies in America and the Caribbean, Spain and Portuguese in Latin America in order to build up their society. And then after America became independent, 1781, America continued to import slaves. Right? And seen here, the transatlantic slave trade as it became to be known, ultimately 12,521,336 people were kidnapped and transported over to build the new world. Over in East Africa, Islamic Arab slave traders sold slaves out of markets like in Zanzibar here off the coast of Tanzania, right? And slaves were sold to the Middle East. And I visited the slave market in Zanzibar. Take a look at my mouse here in Zanzibar. Let me show you a picture. This is a slave market in Zanzibar. This is an example of a slave cell. This is where the slaves were put before they were whipped and sold. Slaves who waited to be sold, they were put here. And how the slaves were priced, the slaves would be whipped. And if the slaves could take the pain, then the price would be high. It meant the slaves were strong. If the slaves could not take the pain, then the price would be low. It meant the slaves were weak. Imperialism in the Middle East. The Europeans colonized North Africa, Morocco, Libya, Algeria, Egypt, right? The French took Morocco and Algeria. The British took Egypt and Sudan. The Italian took Libya, right? The Ottoman Empire here, they took the Middle East. And the British and the French, ultimately, they built the Suez Canal. You see this mouse here? This used to be all land, right? There was no water here. This water here did not exist. This is all land, okay? This is the Red Sea. This is the Red Sea right here, okay? And then so what the British and the French did was that they removed this land. They removed the earth, right? They hired local Egyptians and they removed the earth in order to connect the water here and to connect the water here to make a shortcut. Before, ships would have to go all the way down to the southern tip of Africa in order to go to India, right? But with this, it's a great shortcut. You can cut the trip in half by this. So imagine this used to be all land. This used to be all sand. And it was taken out, connected with water, so ships can go through. All right, so there you have it. Imperialism all around the world. And I want to talk to you about the assignment for this week. Do you have any questions for me before I talk about the assignments for this week? Any questions for me, guys? All right, the assignment for this week, if you go to Google Classroom, all right, you have 5 assignments this week. You have the online session 4 interactive map. Actually, I'm going to take this one out. No, I'll do it later. You got the online session 4 interactive map. You got the online session 4 interactive gallery. Online session 4 interactive primary source. I want you to answer the questions on Google Doc and submit it here in Google Classroom. And then you have the online session for journal, right? I really enjoy reading your journal. Keep that up. And keep up answering the questions with a formal response with a topic sentence, at least 2 evidence, and connections. And then I want you to go into this lecture and I want you to take notes, session 4 notes, all right? I took this video, this lecture has been recorded. I am going to upload this video here in Google Classroom, and I want you to take notes of the lecture, all right? I want you to take notes on the 3 topics. I want you to take notes on the causes of imperialism, the types of imperial rule and imperialism all around the world by going into Google Classroom and then clicking on this lecture. All right, I want you to take notes. I'm going to post it. I just recorded this lecture. All right, so those are your assignments for this week. And at this time, I can take questions. If you have any questions, and you can ask questions in the chat if you wish. If you don't have any questions, then you are free to exit. I wish you have a great week, a safe week, and I will see you. Next Wednesday. I'll stay here for a moment to answer your question if you have any questions. Otherwise, you're free to exit. Bye-bye.